Estamos aqui no 22º Congresso Brasileiro de Direito Ambiental, promovido pelo Instituto Direito por um Planeta Verde, e agora vamos conversar com a professora Cristina Voight. Professora Cristina, a senhora acabou de participar de um painel sobre desenvolvimento sustentável e seus objetivos. Gostaríamos de escutar um pouco mais as suas perspectivas sobre o assunto. Professor Cristina, we just heard your talk on sustainable development and its objectives. So we would like to hear a little bit more about your opinion on this matter.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my opinion. I have been working with sustainable development from a legal perspective for about the last 15 years. And what initially triggered my interest in sustainable development was that I've seen it pops up everywhere. You see it in brochures, declaration, everywhere, and everybody wonders what it actually means. And so I started my research looking at its roots, looking where it came from as a concept. And it turns out that it's not just this simple balancing of all sorts of interests, and you hope you end up with something that keeps economy and social and environmental protection going for a long time. But it has actually an ecological core, because all human activities, whether they're social or economic, they have to be defined within the thresholds of environmental or ecological services and the resource base. And that idea of thresholds within the environment needs to be interpreted, needs to be understood and interpreted into the conception of sustainable development. So in my view, this is the core, the very heart of sustainable development, is that we have to understand how far we can stress ecological services without them having collapsing. And from there, we can build our legal and social and economic endeavors and make them last within the resilience and within the threshold for ecological survival. Because by the end of the day, nothing is sustainable if we deplete our resource base and if we destroy ecological foundations of human life.
Professora, no seu painel, a senhora comentou que está trabalhando na sua pesquisa a respeito do Acordo de Paris. A senhora poderia comentar um pouquinho sobre como a senhora vê a situação atualmente? Professor Cristina, during the panel, Professor Cristina, during the panel, you told us that you are researching mostly on the Paris Agreement. Can you talk a little bit more about this matter?
Yes, I'm happy to, especially in these days where there's a lot of focus on the Paris Agreement. Again, similar with sustainable development, I started my research on climate change law, on regulation that helps us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, again, about 15 years ago. And because I see the climate vulnerability as one of those ecological thresholds that actually define sustainable development. So as long as we don't resolve the global problem of climate change, we will not have sustainable development. So it's an interlinked aspect in my long-standing research. But because I've been working on climate change, I've also been involved in the negotiations for the Norwegian government. So I've worked as their legal advisor for the last 10 years, which gave me the chance to experience the negotiations from the inside. So I've been in the negotiation rooms and participated, but also to sit back a little bit and reflect over what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've learned. And that gave me a very interesting vantage point, because I could then analyze the text of the Paris Agreement, work on it, publish on it, both from an academic perspective but also from a practitioner perspective. The aspects that I'm most interested in are the equity sharing and burden and effort sharing between countries, and the question of differentiation between different countries, especially between North and South countries. And that was one of the most controversial aspects of the negotiations, and I've been very privileged to publish articles, to publish several reflections about how it is reflected in the Paris Agreement. I also work on questions of climate damages, of state sovereignty and state responsibility for climate damages. That seems to be an area which still needs to gain some recognition because the damages are not yet that pronounced, but in my belief that it will happen. By the time we see significant climate damages, for example, to small island developing states, land inundation, flooding, erosion, there will be the question of liability of other states that caused the problem. And that's a very, very interesting but also intricate legal question that I've spent a lot of time on. And I can only invite lawyers, young lawyers, students all over the world to work on these issues, because these are the defining legal issues of our time. And we really need bright, well-trained, well-educated lawyers who take up these challenges, work on lawmaking, but also implementation, on legal advice, and eventually become judges with the conscious experience of these questions, of these challenges of our time.
Professora Cristina, nessa edição do 22º Congresso Brasileiro de Direito Ambiental, a editora do Instituto, Direito por Planeta Verde, está lançando um livro sobre o estado de direito ecológico, qual é um assunto que a senhora aborda bastante. Gostaríamos de saber um pouco mais a respeito da sua pesquisa nesse sentido.
Well, the rule of law for nature, that was a concept that I thought, I'm still very intrigued by, because I see it as something that is very under-researched. There is not a lot of work yet spent on what the rule of law actually means in terms of protecting the environment. It is a civilization doctrine that has always been protected the individual from the sovereign against misuse of power and intrusion of the personal sphere. It increases participation and protection of rights, but it has not yet had an environmental dimension. The question is, how can we use the rule of law concept as a concept that enables the judiciary, the legal aspects of how societies are governed, also to take into account environmental protection. And for that reason, I gathered a lot of international and national lawyers at the Congress in Oslo about 5-6 years ago, and we had wonderful discussions, and they're reflected in the book that I have been so privileged to edit. But in my view, it's only the starting point. It is really about raising the issue, raising awareness, but passing the ball on to students, to scholars, to practitioners in this field, maybe raising the awareness, giving some ideas, but there's still so much more work to be done in order to really effectively integrate environmental protection in the rule of law.
Professora Cristina, por último, gostaríamos de saber a sua opinião sobre o futuro do direito ambiental. Professor Cristina, lastly, we would like to hear your opinion about the future of environmental law.
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball and could say something about it. I personally believe that we should not look at environmental law as an isolated area of law, because by isolating it, we sort of remove it from all other areas and maybe marginalize it. In my belief, environmental protection needs to be an integrated part of every other field of law. Let it be whatever, human rights, let it be criminal law, let it be property protection, whatever you have, civil law, public law, building codes. There's so many areas of law, and if you separate environmental law, you just marginalize it and you put it into a box, and then you have to somehow cross the border. But environmental considerations need to be part of the parcel of all other areas of environment of regulation, in order to really bring the idea home that the environment is us, the environment is everything around us, including us, and in order to protect the basis for human activities, for human economic activities, social activities, it has to be understood that it's something that affects everything else. And it becomes very clear now, as I said earlier, working with climate change, you can't really deal with climate change isolated. It's something that addresses every other aspect of human endeavor. And trying to regulate the emission of greenhouse gases already brings it home that it has to be included in all other areas of law and policy making. So I see the environmental, or the future of environmental law, something as not being isolated and standalone, but something that really is part and parcel of everyone. And I would like to, have colleagues that teach all the other areas of law at the university to be environmentally conscious and environmentally trained. And I think there's a new generation of lawyers coming that actually grow up and are educated with this understanding. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Professora Cristina, o Instituto Direito por Planeta Verde agradece a sua participação. Professor Cristina, the Law for a Green Planet Institute thanks you for your participation.
Thank you. Muito obrigada.